What is Deno JS? Why does everyone talk about it? And how can you use it to build something useful? These are the questions we are going to cover in today's video. Stay tuned. Deno JS was just recently released. It is a new JavaScript runtime, which means that it allows JavaScript to be run in places other than just the browser. If you think about it, Node.js is also a JavaScript runtime, and they seem to have a really similar name, Node and Deno. Why is that? Deno has been built by the same author that built Node. That's why he called it Deno. Node, but better. There are a lot of advantages of using Deno. One of the biggest advantages is that it has a built-in TypeScript support. Does that mean that we cannot use JavaScript with it? Not at all. We can. We can use both JavaScript and TypeScript. Also, Node was kind of out of date in the sense that we couldn't use a lot of ES6 plus features like imports, exports, promises, and async await. In Deno, you can do anything you do while writing client-side JavaScript. That means that you can use imports and exports, promises, async await, and all the new features. Another great thing about Deno is that it is based around security. It is more secure than Node. If you want to access some files, you need to explicitly give it permissions. That's not the case in Node. And the last major difference is how Node and Deno manage packages. With Node, we use npm and all packages are stored in our package.json. With Deno, you just take any URL that leads to a file and import it directly. No more package.json, nor the infamous Node modules. So the question is Deno going to replace Node? The short answer is not yet. Deno is currently in its early stages. It just hit version 1. And a lot of things Deno is trying to achieve are still in progress. Along with that, you could say that one of the main benefits of Deno could currently be its main disadvantage. Deno is currently not using npm, and the current JavaScript world revolves around it. npm is most likely going to stay, so Deno will need to have a better support with npm packages. With that said, there is no reason why not to just learn the basics of Deno, just so you know what's happening. So in future time, if you can see Deno being used, you can easily adapt and change your Node projects with Deno projects. For that exact reason, in this video, I'll show you how to build a simple to-do app API using Deno. Before we dive right in, there is one thing you're going to need. It's going to be a Postman account. You're going to download the Postman app, and we are going to use Postman to make requests. So if you are not using it right now, it's really useful tool for all backend developers because you can just test your requests. What you can do is go to download and then download it for your operating system right here. Like that. And the second thing you're going to, of course, need to have is going to be our friend Deno the dinosaur. So what you need to do is go under installation here. The URL is deno.land. Pretty simple. It's going to be in the description as well. In here, you can see how to install it. There are many different ways on how to install Deno. You can just choose one that suits your operating system. Once you do that, we can go back to Visual Studio Code and you can open an empty folder. Once that is out of the way, we can open our console by going to View, and then you can go to Terminal. Great, we can finally start with coding the app. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a readme.md. In there, we are just going to have some little notes about our app. In here, I'll put all different routes which our app is going to have. You can see it's a to-do app, so we're going to have a get request to /todos to get the list of all to-dos. We are going to have a post route, put route, and delete route to delete to-dos. Again, this is not going to have any styling. This is a backend app or an API, but just to show the to-dos, we are going to make some routes there. And then this is how you're going to run our app. Every app needs to have an index.js file. It's the same as in Node. You're going to have an application of some sorts that is going to be run. So in this case, we are going to have import, and then there we are going to have application, and then from something. So as you can see in here, we are using import from syntax, which is ES6+ imports and exports. So where are we going to import this application from? Well, it's going to be from a link. As we said in Deno, you import all the things strictly from links. That's it. So if I take a look right now, and if I go to that link, you'll be able to see that it's going to open the file for us. In here, we have some stuff coming from Deno or from the application. So we're going to use these things to actually initiate our application. You can think about this oak, as you can see here, it's called oak, as the same thing as the express is in Node. It helps us with routing, that's it. So if we go back, now we know that this is for routing. And what we can do is first we need to set up our port. So we're going to import our port. It's going to be constant from /config. So this is the file that we are going to create. We can save that and let's go create a config.js file. Inside of there, we of course have to do export const, and then we are going to have a port, which is just going to be 5000 in this case. Now we have this port, which is a number of 5000, and we can continue with coding our index.js. The second thing after the port are going to be our routes. So let's import router from /router.js. This is also going to be the file that we are going to create. So let's do that right now. Router.js. And what are we going to have inside of there? Well, we're going to have all of our routes, but for that, we also need to do another import. So import router from, and it's the same link as we used the first time. It's the oak library or the oak package or module, however you want to call it. This thing would usually be fetched from Node modules, and you would just have something like express. In this case, it's called oak, but we are not getting it from Node modules. We are getting it from the link, as you can see right there. So that's where we are getting our router from. Once we have it, we can initiate a new router by typing const router is equal to new router. And now we can do something with it. We can, for example, give it a get request. So if I do this, router.get, inside of there, we accept the first parameter, which is going to be the route, just the slash for this one. And in there, we have a callback function, which takes in a response, and then an error function, which is going to be executed once the user makes a get request to the slash URL. Great. So what we can do there is we can say response.body, and then we can make it equal to, let's say, to-do list API using Deno runtime. That's it, just like that. So we are sending that to the browser as response body if a user makes a get request to just slash. Let's just export default router so we can use it in the index.js while we are making the setup. So if we go back to index, now we have our router, we have our port, and what do we need to do next? Well, it's the same thing as in Node. We are going to do app.use, and inside of there, we are going to initiate our router by typing router.routes. This is going to enable us to visit those routes. Afterwards, we can say app.use router.allowed methods. And we need to make these checks to allow our Deno app to be able to access those routes. As we said, Deno is much more secure than Node, so we need to implicitly allow Deno to visit those routes with all the methods available. Okay, now that that is done, we can do the same thing we do in Node, console log, and then server is running, open, and then we can say https://localhost, and then in there we have the port, of course. We can put the semicolon, and that's it. So now you can see we are running the server. The last thing we need to do is we need to make our app listen for all upcoming requests. So we're going to do await app.listen, and then inside of there, we are going to have a port, which is going to be equal to our constant port. That's it. Now this is crazy. This await inside of here in global scope of this index.js file, it's absolutely crazy. You cannot do this in client-side JavaScript. You cannot do this in Node. You need to wrap await keyword in async function. In Deno, you don't have to do that. That's done for you in the backend of Deno. But as you can see here, we can just use await in the global scope. So that's one of the cool new features. Okay, and looks like I missed one small but really important thing. In there, we need to say const app and then actually initiate that app. So new application, which is coming from Oak right there at the top. You might have been wondering, where is this app coming from? My bad, it's coming from here. It's an instance of application coming from Oak, which is coming from Deno. That's it. With that out of the way, our index.js file is done and we should be able to run our Deno application. So let's see if we can do that. We can go to README. I'm going to paste this in the description, but let's write it by hand one time together. So it's Deno run. And as I said, it's going to be much more secure than Node. So we actually have to put a lot of flags there to be able to give access to Deno so we can read our routes. So we have to allow net, allow read, allow write, and then finally after that, we can do / and then run our index.js file. If I do that, as you can see, server is running, open localhost 5000. If I click that and go to localhost 5000, you can see localhost sent an invalid response and we cannot get it. There's also one small thing we need to change. This thing here needs to be HTTP instead of HTTPS. So I'm just going to remove this S at the end. I'm going to save the file, close the current window. Let me do that. And then we are going to open it one more time to actually rerun the server. So right there, we're going to take the last command and just run it. You can go to last command by pressing just the arrow up right there. And if I do that, now we have HTTP localhost 5000 instead of HTTPS. It should be HTTP. So if I go there now, as you can see, we get to-do list API using Deno runtime, which means our server is up and running. Great. Now we have to create our routes. So just to keep a nice and tidy file structure, I'm going to create a new folder called controllers. And also inside of there, we are going to have a folder called to-dos. Inside of there, we are going to have 4 routes. So let's create the files for them right now. We are going to have a get.js, delete.js, post.js, and then put.js. Okay, get is for getting all of them, post for creating one, delete for deleting one, and then put for changing the status of one to do. Great. With that, now that we've done that, we need to have some database. In this case, our database is going to be pretty simple. We're going to create a new folder called data, and inside of there, we're going to create a to-dos.json. In this case, our database is basically a JSON file. So what is going to be inside of that JSON file? I'm going to paste it for you, and also I'm going to leave it in the description so you can just copy and paste it, but feel free to add your own to-dos if you want to. So give me just a moment. Okay, so here are our to-dos. As you can see, we have an array of 3 different objects. First one has an ID of 1, title of walk the dogs, and it is not completed. The second one has an ID of 0, title of create a Deno JS tutorial, and completed of false. And the final one has the ID of 2, title subscribe to JavaScript mastery, and completed to true. If this is not completed for you, feel free to smash that subscribe button for the YouTube algorithm and stay tuned for more great videos. Okay, with that out of the way, now we have our database. We also have files where we're going to create our routes. So let's do our first route, which is going to be get.js. Inside of there, we'll see how we can fetch all of the different to-dos that we have. First of all, we're going to have to make a connection to this to-dos JSON. So we're going to go to config, and in there, we are going to create a new constant, export const file path, which is basically going to be a string path to the actual database. So that's going to be /data/to-dos.json. That's it. We're just putting this as a constant because we're going to have to reference this thing a lot of the times. So it's easier to just have it as a constant and use it in all different files. So if you go inside of there, we are of course going to import that file path. Import file path from, and that's coming from config.js, just like that. Now we have access to the file path, which is just going to point to our to-dos. In here, each one of our routes is going to be an asynchronous function. So we're going to do export default async. It's going to be unnamed function. And as the parameter, we are receiving a response. So let's wrap that as parameters right there. We are receiving a destructured response. And then inside of there, we can do a try catch block because we are, and then inside of there, we can do a try catch block because we are inside of an asynchronous function. Great. First, in the try block, we need to try to get our data. So I'm going to call the variable data. And then inside of there, we're going to do something called await. Then we have access to the Deno variable. It's coming out of the box when you're in a Deno application. And it has a method called read file. To read file, you just need to provide a file path. And that's it. Now we're going to try to console log data so we can see what we got back when our Deno read file read our database. Let's see if we are getting some meaningful data right there. If I save this, we need to restart our server each time. So I'm pressing Command C to close the server and then arrow up and enter to just rerun it. Don't forget to do that. Okay, now we need to connect our get route to our router.js. In there, we are going to do router, and then let's just create a .get route to /todos. It needs to be in a string. And then we are going to call a function getTodos. This function is going to be coming from our get controllers. So what we can do is just at the top, we can import getTodos from .controllers/todos/get. So this is where we are getting our function. This getTodos right here means that once we make a get request to /todos, our getTodos function is going to be ran, and that's exactly this thing right there. So if we save it, save the router, and one more time ran Command C or Control C, sorry, and then arrow up. Okay, this getTodos function needs to be imported from somewhere. So we are going to do import getTodos from, and it's going to be ./controllers/todos, and then finally /get.js. Don't forget this .js at the end because it's not going to work otherwise. Okay, so what this means is that we're going to run our getTodos function once we make a get request to /todos. And this getTodos is nothing other than just our function we created a moment before. So if I now rerun this by just going Deno run, we get some errors. Okay, looks like I have a syntax error, which means that I have one parenthesis too much right there and then right there. If we do that, save it and then rerun it, we should be able to see server is running and we can open localhost 5000. Once we go here, now we can go to /todos and we get localhost page can be found, which is fully okay. We are not trying to render anything right now. The only thing we are doing is we are rendering the data. So let's see what the data actually is. Is it our database, our files, or not? We are getting some weird thing right there, a lot of numbers. This is basically not meaningful to us. So what we need to do is we need to parse it and decode the file. It's just how we have to do it in Deno and Node. It cannot read the database all by itself. So what you need to do is you need to import just at the top there, const decoder is going to be equal to new text decoder. And this is coming directly from Deno, so you don't have to worry about importing it. We just get the variable decoder from new text decoder. Now we need to decode our data that we got here. So we're going to say const todos is going to be equal to json.parse, and then inside of there we're going to have decoder that decode and then we are going to pass in the data that we created right there. Now, if we console log the to-dos instead of the data, let's see if we're going to get something more meaningful. Again, I'm just going to run Control-C and then rerun the server, go back and visit our localhost 5000. Of course, go to /todos. Again, nothing is rendered, but if we go back, you can see we indeed do get a list of our to-dos. Great. So now let's actually show something to the user. We are going to make our response, that status, to be equal to 200. And we are also going to make our response, that body, to be equal to status success. And also we are going to show some to-dos. So let's do to-dos. These are to-dos we just fetched. We want to show them in the body. We want to render them. So if I save this, let's quickly add the same thing for the error. But in this case, it's going to be 500, which is basically a server error. And then we can say failed and just basically do to-dos an empty array because we don't have any to-dos then. If I save this, again, Control-C and then rerun it. And if we go back to the browser, refresh, now, as you can see, we indeed do get our JSON database API GET request with Oak or Deno JS. This is something you could do in Node.js, but now we did it in Deno JS. It's not that complicated once you get used to the syntax of Deno and all the things that you need to know. Now that our GET request is done, let's move on to, let's say, a POST request so we can create new requests. To do this, we need to do basically the same thing we did in GET request. We need to first import the file path. So let's do that. We can even open the post on the side of GET so we can see what we were doing. So it's going to be really similar. First, we import the path, and then we create a function for that specific path. In this case, we're going to have X for default, and then async right there. Of course, it's going to be async function, which is going to have a response. And in this case, we are also going to have a request because we need to get the data from that specific request. Then we are going to close that function right there. And we have our try and catch block, just like that. For now, just for visibility's sake, I'm going to close this GET request and we can keep on working only on this POST request. Just at the top of our try block, we are also going to do const decoder, which is going to be equal to new text.decoder. We need that to decipher the data. So text decoder, and we are going to call that as a function. I'm going to replicate that because in this case, we have a response, but we also have a request. So once we decode it, we are also going to need our encoder right there, encoder from text encoder. Okay, now that we have that, we can focus on actually making the request. So right there, what we're going to do is instead of actually getting the data, we need to receive the data through our request. Now, if I rerun this application by running the same command one more time, if we go to localhost 5000, you can see we do get the data. If I do /todos, we also get a list of all the to-dos. But here's the thing, whenever you visit a page in the browser does the GET request. So browser can only do GET requests. That's it. You cannot do POST, you cannot do delete. In here, we just do a GET request to /localhost. In here, we just do localhost 5000 /todos, and that's a GET request. So how can we test or how can we send the data to the API making a POST request or delete request, for example? That's where the Postman comes in. This is the Postman open. If you installed it, you're going to see something like this. What's the story, morning glory, they say. And what we want to do right there is click on this plus sign, and in there we get a specific GET request. So in there we can do, just for testing purposes, the same thing we did in our browser. So localhost 5000 and then to-dos. If we send this, we should get our response right there. And as you can see, we do. But this is nothing special, right? We can also get the data in the browser. Let's create a new request. So in there, this is going to be a POST request, and it's going to go to the same identical path, localhost 5000 /todos, but keep in mind, this thing is a to-do request. So if we go back to our app In there, we have to go to the router, as you can see right there, and let's add a post route. So post, as we said, is going to be the same route /todos, and in there, we're going to add a post to do function, just like that. Of course, we need to import our function. So let's do import post to do from ./controllers /todos, and then we have post.js, just like that. Now, if we save that, we shouldn't run into any issues, and we have the post. So how can we test the data which we receive in the post request? Here in the try block, let's try to console log this request to see whether we are getting any meaningful data. So if I do console.log and then put the request in there, let's save it, let's run it. And right now, if I go back to Postman, let's try to make that specific post request right there. So how do you actually send the data to your API? In here in the Postman, you can go to body and then you put raw. So we want to send raw data, and it's going to be in form of JSON. One more time, you go to body, raw, and then JSON. So JSON is basically JavaScript object notation. It's really similar to how JavaScript objects look and behave. So let's try following the structure of our to-do. It is one object that has a title property. In JSON, we need to wrap our keys in quotation marks. And then in there, let's put the title, for example, test, just test. And then we are also going to have is completed, or I think we just had completed. And then that's going to be set to false at the beginning, just like that. So now if I click send, we are going to send this data. Let's do it. Okay, we are not getting anything. Let's go back to our app to see if something happened. Okay, we indeed do get this request, but it's just a large request. There's a lot of stuff in it. So what we actually need to do is we need to say request.body, and then we run it as a function. And also we need to await that. So I'm going to add an await keyword before the request.body. So let's try it one more time. Control C to leave the server running, and then arrow up to run it again. Go back to Postman, and now I'm going to send another request. Okay. If we go back, now we can see we get some data. We get type JSON, and we get the value of title test and completed false. That's amazing. So now using some destructuring magic, we can get just the title and completed. We can take anything we want from this little object. So what we can do is let's store that in a variable const. In here, we are going to get a destructured value. As you can see here, we have one big object. We want to take just the value from it. So right there, I'm going to take the value. And then we can do one more destructuring to take the actual title. So we are only concerned about title right now. We are going to set all to-dos to be equal to false at the beginning. So I shouldn't have even sent this completed property that's going to be added or set to false at the beginning for us in this request. So now let's try just console logging the title to see whether it's passing through properly. If I do this, again, reclose it and reopen it. Let's test it one more time, and we can even delete this completed property. Send. And as you can see, we get our title. Now we are going to be able to add it to our application. First, we have to fetch our to-dos, and the process to do that is going to be the same as in get. So we can basically copy this thing right there. If you remember, first we are fetching the data, we are reading from the file, and then we are parsing the data so we can get actual to-dos. So what are we going to do once we get the actual list of to-dos? Now, what we have to do is we can create our new to-do, which is going to be an object, of course. It's going to have an ID, which is going to be to-dos.length +1, just like that. And it's also going to have a title, which is going to be equal to title. The title, of course, which is coming from here. And it's also going to have a property completed, which is going to be set to false, as we said at the beginning. Great. With JavaScript objects, if the key and the value have the same name, you can basically just omit the latter and just have the title right there. So now we have our new to-do, and what are we going to do with it? Well, we're just going to do to-dos that push new to-do. We are just adding it to our, let's say, database. That's not gonna be enough. Now we have to actually write it or change the actual database file with new added to-dos. So what we're going to do is await Deno that write file. So this is how we can write into different files with Deno. We need to get the file path in there. So file path. And the second thing is we need to encode that thing. So we're going to call our encoder. That encode JSON.stringify, and then we have the to-dos. It's a bit complicated syntax, but it's just how we work with different files. So we need to first get the file, we need to read from the file, and then we needed to decode it. But in this case, we had to write into the file, so we had to encode the text right there. With that out of the way, we are going to set the response.status to be equal to 201, which means created, and also response.body to be equal to, let's say, status of success, and also new to do, which is just going to show the new to do which we just created. And just to write some good error handling, let's write response.status to be equal to 502, which is a server error, and then we have response.body, which is going to be equal to status failed to create a new to do, and we are going to pass in the error. Okay, just like that. If we save that, let's rerun it. So close this and rerun it, go back to our Postman, and let's see what we are going to get. So let's change it to, for example, walk the dogs. Just like that. If I send it, we get a status of success, and we get to see the new to do we just created. Amazing. Now, if we go into browser and if we tried refreshing the page, we are going to make a new GET request to our localhost 5000/todos. As you can see in here, we indeed do get our to-do. We have another one called walk the dogs, but this one with ID of 4 is our current one, which we just created. Amazing. So now let's go back and let's say that we don't want to have both of these, walk the dogs and walk the dogs. We want to create an endpoint for deleting to-dos. So how do we do that? To delete to-dos is going to be a pretty similar thing to what we have so far. We can create a new request right there. We're going to make it a delete request. Again, we have localhost 5000/todos, but this time we are also going to have the ID of the to-do we want to delete. Now we have to figure a way how to make our delete request to this route, and also how to get this ID right. We can go back to our code and implement that route. So if we go to the router, right there, we're going to create a .delete route, which is also going to be /todos, but this time it's going to be /. This means that it is a dynamic parameter. It's coming to our request. Okay, and of course we have delete to do, which we didn't create yet, but we're going to create it right now. Let's also import it. So delete to do, and that's going to be coming from delete. Okay, we can save that, and now we can move to the delete route. In here, it's also going to be a really similar thing to what we had in the post. So let's open them side by side. Okay, first things first, we're going to open the import to the file path, and then it's also going to be a function. So let's do that. Export default async. In here, we're going to have a response, but in this case, we are not going to have a request. As you can see here, we are not concerned with the data coming in. What we have in here are going to be params coming to our request. And with that, we are going to open our function block just like that. I'm going to copy the decoder and the encoder here because we're going to need it as well. And then we can open a try and catch block. And we are also going to have to find a way to fetch the data or to-dos from our database and then decode them. So that's pretty standard so far. I'm just going to copy it right there. Now we have the to-dos, and we have to find a way on how to delete the to-do from the actual to-dos. To do that, we are going to create a new array called updated to-dos, which is going to be equal to to-dos.filter. And in there, of course, we have to-do. And now we have to take all to-dos, but only the to-do that has the same ID, we need to take it out. We need to filter it out. So how do we do that with filter? We first get our to-do. So let's do to-do.id. And then also we need to compare that to the ID coming from params. So that's going to be not equal to params.id. So one more time on what's happening here is we are going to go through all to-dos and we are going to filter out all the ones that have the ID, which is going to be the same to the params.id. If you remember correctly, that's this one coming here. Okay, just one small thing that we need to do. This is going to be coming as a string. So if we want to compare it with triple equal, we need to cast it to a number. Okay, great. Now we have those updated to-dos and we basically need to, again, put them to our database. That's the same thing we had in the post, remember? But this time we were adding new to-dos. This time we're just going to set the updated to-dos to the actual post. So if I close this, in here we had to-dos, but this time we're just going to have updated to-dos, which I'm going to push to our right file in to-dos.json, just like that. Okay, just to provide a user which is deleting the to-do with some useful information, we're going to set a response.status to 200. And we are also going to set a response.body to be equal to a status of success. And it's also going to have data, which are going to be updated to-dos, just to show the updated to-dos after the deletion is complete. Great. Again, as every time, we are also going to create some error handling. So response.status is going to be 502. And then response.body is going to be equal to an object with a status of failed to delete. And in there, we are going to pass in the error, just like that. Okay, now that should be done. We can do Control-C to close it and then rerun it again. With Node.js, we had something called nodemon, which would basically restart the server every time we made a change. I'm sure there is something like that in Deno, so you don't have to just rerun it every time manually. Okay, so if we check it out right now, we can go back to the actual postman. And then in here, let's try to delete the to-do with the ID of 4, which we just created in the post, as you can see right here. Okay, I'm sending the request and we get success. And in here we see the data is actual list of 3 to-dos without the 4th one, which we just created. Amazing, that works flawlessly. The last thing that we need to do is create a put request. Put request manages updating. So we want to update our to-do to either change the title or we want to change the state of completed, for example, to true or to false. So in here, let's see what route are we going to have. The route is going to be equal to the one in the delete. So we need to specify which one do we want to target. So I'm going to copy this and put it right there. But in this case, as you can see, it is a put request. Now we can go back to our app and we can create our route as we always do. In here, we are going to create our route as we always do. It's going to be .put. The route is going to be the same as with delete. So it's going to be /todos and then /:id because it's a dynamic parameter. And that's going to be called put to do, just like that. We can end this with a semicolon right there because that's our last route. And in here, we can import it. So import put to do from, and this is going to be put. The put route is going to be the combination of our post route and delete route. From the post, we are going to have to take the request, and from delete, we're going to have to take params. We need params because we need to specify which one we want to update, and we need the request because we're going to have to change, we're going to have to pass the data what we want to change with that specific to do. So let's go right there. Of course, we need to do import file path from .. and there we have config.js. Okay, it's going to be the same thing, export default, and then we have an async function. In this case, as we said, we are going to have request, response, and params. We need to take the encoder and decoder. So const decoder is going to be equal to new text decoder, and then that's going to be a function. And then we need to take encoder, so encoder from encoder right there. Then we have a try catch block. In here, we need to do almost the same thing we did right there while we are fetching the data from the actual request.body. So I'm going to copy this line from post request and paste it right there. So we are trying to fetch the title, but in this case, we also need to fetch the current complete status from the request.body. That's going to be coming from here. Once we go to the put route, in the body, raw, JSON, and in here, if you remember the post route, we were sending something right there. So let's copy that. And with the title right now, we can change the title. So let's do test1. And then we can also change the completed state. So instead of completed to false, we can set it to true. Of course, this is currently not gonna work. This is just to show you that we need to manage the title and completed. So now we can go back. We have the title and the complete here. Oops, I have the complete. It needs to be completed. And now we have to, as always, fetch the to-dos from our database. So in the get, we have a nice way of doing that. I'm just going to copy it, paste it right there. We get the data, we read the file, and then we have to decode it to get the actual to-dos. So now the question is, what do we do with those to-dos? We have to update only the to-do that changed. So to do that, we are going to create const updated to-dos, and we are going to map over all the to-dos. We have to find only the to-do that matches the ID which we are getting from params. To do that, we are going to create an if statement, check the to-do.id, and match it against the params.id. If that's true, then we know that we fetched our correct to-do, which we need to update. If you remember, this needs to be wrapped in a number because it's currently comparing it to a string of params ID. So if we are in there, if we are working with a correct to-do, we want to return the change to-do. So first of all, we're going to spread that specific to-do, and then we are going to set the title to be equal to the title with the structure at the top, and the completed state to be equal to the completed state we had above. If you remember correctly, if we have the same key and the value, we can just omit the letter. So we can just have this, and we can have just this. With this, we are changing our list of updated to-dos by only updating the to-do with which is specified with params we are sending in. Okay, now finally we can return that to-do. And if we are not working with the to-do that user chose, then we want to just return the to-do. Because in here we are currently mapping over all to-dos to set the updated ones. We are only changing this one, and for all the other ones in the list, we just return them how they were. Okay, now if you remember correctly, we have to do the same thing as we did in the post. We have to actually write that to the database. So I'm going to take this line and then paste it right there. In this case, we are not going to have to-dos here. We have to change them with updated to-dos right there. Okay, and now let's do response.status. 204 means changed, and response.body status of success. And then we're going to set the data to be equal to updated to-dos so the user can see what he did. Again, we're good guys, so we're going to do some proper error handling. Response.status is going to be equal to 502, and response.body is going to be equal to status of failed to update. And that's going to be the error right there. With that out of the way, our last route should be done. It should work. We now should be able to get to-dos, to add to-do, delete a to-do, and then to change a to-do. So let's now do Control-C to get out of this, and then rerun the server and delete all to-dos just so we can see whether everything is working properly. So I'm going to delete the to-do of ID of 0, and then also delete the to-do of ID of 2, and we should be left with empty data. How can we check whether that's true? We can go back to get request, make it, and you can see we have no to-dos. We can also check in the browser. So if I now refresh, you can see we have no to-dos, empty database. Let's say that you get this when you register an account. Now you're the user, you come in and you want to create some to-dos. So let's do that. Of course, this looks really boring right now, but you could connect a nice looking front end with React, for example, to create these to-dos. So right now in here, let's go to a post route and let's create a to-do with a title of walk the dogs, and the completed state is going to be equal to false. But if you remember correctly, we said that we don't even have to have the completed because by default it is set to false. So let's do this one for the first. Okay, we get failed to create a new to-do, and that's because I mistyped this. In JavaScript, it is okay to have trailing commas in the objects, but in JSON, you cannot have a comma right there. But you can see it's great that we created error handling because now we know that something doesn't work. So now if I resend it, we can see new to-do was created. Let's do a few more. Right there, let's do learn Deno JS. Okay, created. We can go back to the get route to see whether everything is working properly. And we do get 2 of those. So now let's try adding just one more so we can practice something. Let's do, for example, test. Okay, created. Now let's try to delete one. So let's delete the test one. I'm going to go to the do's, and in here, the only thing we have to change is the actual ID. So if I do this, okay, we get back the current state. And if we go back to get request, you can see the third one is deleted. Amazing. The last thing we can test out is to change the completed state of learn Deno JS to true. So right there, let's create a put request to the ID of 2 right there. And what we want to do is we want to send some data. We want to send the title. The title is learn Deno JS, if I'm not mistaken. Learn Deno JS. And we also want to create the completed state. We want to change it to true. So just like that, if I do this and if I click send, you can see we get success. And now you can see the changed data. Again, just to check it to be sure, we can go back to the get and you can see this changed to true. Again, this currently looks really boring, but what you could do is you could connect it to a front end of some sort, like React or basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Right there, you could create a nice looking design with your do's. You can cross over the things you've done, or you can make the completed to-dos green and not completed to-dos red. There's really a lot of possibilities by connecting the backend to the front end. Deno JS offers a lot of great possibilities. It's more secure, it has TypeScript support, and it doesn't have to use Node modules. As you can see, we don't have them there. So is it going to replace Node.js? The answer is not yet, but it's on a great path to do so, or just bring some improvements to our current ecosystem. That's it. If you found this video useful, feel free to smash that subscribe button for the YouTube algorithm, and see you in the next video.